I have to
Okay.
accept on one of the biggest live streaming social media platforms that I have to pretend that a trans person who's a biological male is a biological female.
Gender argument. Trump, one of the more popular things that he's done with the Republican base is to be, obviously declaring that there are only two genders, etc. So, Adam, maybe you want to kick this one off. How do you feel about Trump's policies in that regard?
Yeah, when it comes to things like sports, I mean, I would much rather have the sports organizations make these decisions based on what makes sense to them and working with sports scientists when they're looking at things like lung capacity and bone density, which are some of the bigger issues when you're talking about people that transition playing in sports of the opposite sex. Broadly speaking, like a lot of this just seems like virtue signaling stuff where he's like, there are two genders and I proclaim that to the world. And it's like, I guess that's like fine. The issue that I have more so is with things like not allowing trans people to serve in the military. When again, like my understanding is if you're getting into the military, there's probably some standard you have to meet to even make it into there. So like whether or not you're trans, I don't think should have a bearing on that. Broadly speaking, when it comes to things like sports, again, I'm not a medical professional, but my assumption would be like, yeah, especially with combat sports, you probably do want to separate sexes just for safety purposes. But I don't think that this is like a good faith effort from Trump to like parse through the scientific literature and figure out like what are the bone density differences and lung capacity differences. It's more so just like virtue signaling for people that are very anti-trans, culturally speaking.
The reason that there's a portion of quote virtue signaling is because so much of what we've been gaslit into for the past 15 years on this issue itself was virtue signaling. It's actually an insidious cultural maneuver that's being made, and we're indoctrinating everyone, including children, into this cult of a sort of this neo-humanist, oh, you can change your biological sex. It's absurd, right? And it's the people, again, have voted with their feet. It's an 80-20 issue for a reason. We're tired of them.
Sports are an 80-20.
We're tired of not just the sports issue. We're also tired of them chemically altering children. Other countries that we're told have better healthcare systems like UK have put a stop to this because they said that the evidence that's being put forth hasn't been thoroughly studied, and we should not be medically testing and chemically altering or physically altering in the times of surgery people that are not of the age of consent. It is monstrous that we're doing this. So
how widespread do you think these procedures are?
It doesn't matter if it only happens to one person. It's irrelevant. The point is that this is being
The
pushed
facts that matter.
it is being pushed as a virtuous issue. It goes hand in hand with the sexualization of children and other people. And I'm more than happy that we're pushing against this. On the sports issue specifically, I'm interested in this point. You say it should be left up to each sports body. So even when you're talking about like MMA, do you think that the government doesn't have a role? It should just be up to, for example, UFC to say.
I don't think any MMA organization would allow, like, if they are evaluating the current scientific literature.
That's not the question.
This is about outcomes.
But you're saying that it should be up to every specific sports organization.
Who can play in what category? Sure.
Okay, so you would say that there's no government role. The government shouldn't be providing incentive or penalties when it comes to sports. And what sort of sports are being offered? And who
in combat sports, there might be a point that you have there, but again, you'd agree there's some sports where like sex probably doesn't make a huge difference.
Okay, let's take combat sports out of it. How about baseball?
I mean, I'd have to see like what the literature is. Again, this is a thing. Like we're acting like we're doctors here, discussing like specific.
No. I'm not acting like I'm making a specific point. I'll get to. I'm asking as a general theory. You're saying that ultimately the government shouldn't have any role in saying, "Hey, this is who's allowed to participate in this sport, or this is what happens in this sport, or not." That's your general theory.
I mean, I'm sure there's basic protections that they have to afford, but again, what do you mean by that?
Explain Title IX. Were you in favor of that?
Is that just like a sex-based equality?
Right. So Title IX, I think it was, I can't remember, 70s, 80s, but the idea behind it was that the federal government said that they were going to withhold funding to universities unless they offered equal amounts of sports for females as males. Now, one of the net effects that this had was it actually massively decreased in many areas male sports that were offered. So take a university I went to. Let's say that it offered 14 athletic competitions or sports for men and only 2 for women. Well, if under Title IX, they decided this has to be equal, maybe they could only get up to 8 for women. So they were forced to cut back to only 8 for men, or they would run afoul of Title IX and they would lose a lot of their government funding. Are you against Title IX funding that says that each university that receives government funds must offer equal sports for males and females?
If you're describing it accurately, then I'm not in favor of colleges cutting back sports. But again, it also probably
Let's say
depends
that
on
they
like
didn't. Let's say
it
that
also
they
depends
didn't.
on like what is the actual demand for women to play different types of sports? Like, is there enough demand to create 14 different sports leagues for women? Like, I'd much rather have it go on a case by case basis there.
Okay, but that's not what happened. It said, let's just say in theory, forget about they removed male sports even. Let's just say in theory that this law said, or Title IX said, it has to be equal sports for men and women. And they were
Yeah.
able to find enough women's sports to equalize it. Are you in favor of that?
Then sure, yeah. Why wouldn't they offer the same opportunities to both sexes if there's equal numbers of people that want
So
to play
you
those
would be in
sports?
favor of the federal government withholding funding to say like Duke University if they offered in 2020 or 2020 they offered
Assuming it
20
holds
men.
up and assuming it holds up constitutionally speaking, like I'm taking your word for all this. I'm not super familiar with Title IX,
Okay,
but
but what do you mean
that's the
assuming
case,
that it holds up? We're asking what your opinion would be.
my opinion would be you're asking if it's justified for the federal government to withhold funds, and there's going to be certain parameters that dictate justification.
Okay, well, given that, if you're somehow saying if that's constitutional, you'd be for it, and it hasn't been revoked for as long as it's been there, then why wouldn't the federal government have a say in intervening in female-only spaces?
I already said when there's like basic safety precautions, that's fine. But
It has nothing
depends
to do with that. Ping
what
pong.
do you mean by intervening is the question. Like such a broad term.
Like if the idea behind Title IX was female deserve female-only sports, and it wasn't just, oh, just for combat sports. It was
Yeah.
sports in general. And you're like, yeah, I think that's okay for the government
If
to
you're
say.
asking me broadly, I don't think that people should be able to play in sports of the opposite sex. That's my broad
But
umbrella.
you're saying that
opinion on
that
this.
should be up to each individual
But I
athletic
think that
body, not the federal government.
the reason that I caveat that is number one, the medical literature is evolving. And I'm sure there are some sports like fucking chess, which is not even under discussion, but like you can imagine sports where it probably doesn't make a difference.
Well, that's not true. It depends on what you mean makes a difference. Like even when it comes to chess, it might intuitively be to you that males have no
bone density and lung capacity, which
but
can be different even if you transition before puberty.
but again, there's a red herring going on here. We're not just talking in sports or competitions where females could get hurt because of bone density.
That's the 80-20 issue you mentioned, though. That is the 80-20.
Okay. Nonetheless, that's not what we're talking about. That's not what Title IX was about. It was about opportunities. And you deflect from, well, my personal proclivity would be we don't have biological men in female sports. But you're also making the argument that the government doesn't have a say in that. But we have a history in this country of the exact opposite. That the government has, since Title IX, been threatening to withhold funding, saying that we need female-only spaces, and not just female-only spaces in athletics where it's somewhere they could get hurt.
Yeah.
And so so this isn't a radical departure. This falls in line with what we've seen.
Okay, and what exactly is your question on this?
Well, the point is, when your point was, I don't think the government should be involved, they already are. They've been for decades.
Hold on. Again, I said the government's going to be involved in some capacity with anything having to do with sports. There's athletic commissions in different states for professional sports and college sports. Like you're just using very vague language. I don't know what exactly you mean by some of these terms.
I don't know. Can you explain?
Like I agree. I agree fundamentally. The government obviously plays some role in sanctioning and regulating all sports and the actions of many colleges. What specific regulations are we talking about here?
Okay, I'll say this.
That you gave, I agreed with you in that, like, if you're
willing to
cutting back on male sports, I think that's a bad thing.
If you're willing to accept that the government could regulate that each university they send money to should have equal sports for men and women, then are you also willing to accept that they could regulate saying biological men can't be in the women's sports?
Well, I think they should be able to regulate that contingent on the actual demand for equal sports between the two sexes. Like if no women want to play basketball, for example, at a certain college, you shouldn't mandate that college to offer women's basketball.
So then you were against Title IX because that's what Title IX did. It didn't say specific sport to sport. It said you had to have equal. So for example, maybe you didn't have enough women interested in basketball, but you had a diving team.
Yeah, that seems like painting with a broad brush where you could use more specific.
That's what the government did. So you're against that, and you're also against the government. So fine. You're against what has been present in our country for a long time.
I'm taking all of your descriptions for this just for granted that there's no right-wing framing on any of this. I'm just taking this for your word.
That's fine. The other thing is it's interesting because it juxtaposes to the conversation about Trump withholding funding from places like Colombia. When it comes to Title IX, there was an infamous memo that was sent out during the Obama administration that said they were applying Title IX to say that if universities didn't take accusations of like sexual assault, impropriety, etc., seriously, that they could withhold federal funding to these universities. Now, the net result of that was things like the UVA rape hoax, right, and Mattress Girl, where you had all of this swath.
What is Mattress Girl?
Mattress Girl was this girl that became famous that was doing like a performance art project where she walked around with a mattress on her back, and her claim was that she was at some frat party and there was like some gang assault against her. It turned out it was all bullshit. She just made this up. And there was this rash of lack of due process on university that overwhelmingly harmed men, but sometimes harmed women, where there was a rush to any time that there was any bad hookup, not rising to the level of sexual assault. You were incentivized to run to your school as quick as possible and make the first accusation, because these schools were so fearful under Barack Obama and these Title IX restrictions that they were going to lose their funding that they just said, hey man, you're off campus.
That again seems to me like a policy that probably is not tailored to fight the issue it's meant to be fighting. I mean, I'm sure you would agree there's probably a massive issue with things like sexual assault on college campuses, right?
Well, any one sexual assault would be bad, and I think we should do something. So when you say massive,
I don't know. This is not like meant to be a gotcha. Like, you would agree we should probably try to increase like.
Well, right. I'm just saying, like, the
reason
that I hesitate to say yes is because the numbers that were cited as sort of the reason for this was like 1 in every 3 women were raped. I don't think it's that massive, but I would say that there's certainly thousands of people that are harmed.
Definitely statistically very significant and probably higher on college campuses than other places.
I don't know if that's true. There's interesting
frat parties and hazing stuff. Like, I can promise
these are stereotypes. These are stereotypes that oftentimes are cited.
I lived on the campus of University of Michigan. I can promise you some weird shit goes on at frat parties.
So you saw rapes? Did you report them?
I never said I saw rapes. I've heard about crazy hazing though.
So when we're talking about hazing, that's not the same as sexual assault.
Yeah, but I'm talking about the code of conduct on these campuses sometimes is like a little bit insane. So it wouldn't be surprising.
What does hazing mean, guys? Is that something? Is that
it's like initiation into frats? Like you eat like a raw goldfish, or like someone died once because they were in a car trunk on the freeway. Like a lot of weird shit you have to do to prove yourself.
It's like bullying, like when you get jumped into a gang, that would be hazing. What you see on frat, like frat hazing, if you watch movies with like old school and stuff, you remember when they throw the bag over that dude's head and throw him in the back of the van? That's hazing.
I don't see the problem with hazing myself, but there's always different initiations at different football clubs and stuff. But I guess anything that goes into crimes would be bad.
Well, right. There could be hazing that's harmless, but like if part of the hazing is like, you know, we're going to break your arm, that would probably be a problem. But yeah, but the point I'm trying to make is I don't think it's as clear as you're saying. Nonetheless, even if it is a problem, you know, that, and we could say, yes, sexual assault on campus is a problem, no problem. Like the way that went about it, we again saw that Democrats were more than happy to have the federal government intervene and threaten to withhold funds to universities when it came to wanting equal amount of women's sports as men. Now they're taking the opposite tack, saying that biological males should be in female sports. And when it came to these Title IX, this absurd like rush to no due process, how to reject, we could see that they were withholding funds. So now they're crying a foul when the Trump administration is using things like the Civil Rights Act to try to withhold funds from places like Harvard.
We should talk about the Harvard thing in a second, but my broad take here again is because I'm not super familiar with the Title IX stuff. I can only speak in regards to what principles I hold. The reason I'm skeptical of what you're saying is because there's been so many examples. Like I think the Vikram Swamy brought up that like the Department of Education is cutting off funding from schools that like don't allow archery or something. And then it turns out when you read into it, it was just like a wording issue in the law under Congress, and they amended that. So like when it comes to educational funding, forgive me for saying that I maybe don't take everything you say at face value.
Completely fair. I would not expect you to.
I can only share my principles on this, which are that number one, I think as a broad rule, you should have sex-based distinctions in competitive sports at a college level and professional level. Elementary school stuff, like I don't give a fuck if dodgeball is like mixed gender or whatever. I think most people agree on that. When it comes to the concept as being an 80-20 issue, it is 80-20 in sports. When it comes to virtually everything else, like trans people being in the military, or just generally speaking, what is the cultural attitude towards trans people who are a very, very small portion of the population? And another reason I just take issue with this conversation is that, like, sure, I'm not saying it's not important, but in terms of like when we rank the top issues facing America, would this be in your top 10?
Yes, because the reason that it's there is because it's not just this specific issue, though. Anytime you're talking about the mutilation of children and the sexualization of children, that's certainly a top issue. It's because it's indicative of the major problem with our country, which is that these issues are forced down people's throats that sort of causes like a morality loss and a division amongst people.
Think
it's an example of cultural Marxism.
Are forced down people's throats?
Yes, I think that the acceptance of this and having to ignore, I think that the acceptance. I think the acceptance of accepting that a 3-year-old could declare that they're actually a female when they were born a biological male, and having to pretend that that's not grotesque and weird, and being told that we're should be shamed, falls in line with the same sort of arguments that white people should be shamed and Christians should be shamed.
I just want to make sure we're clear that when it comes to
fighting that
like
is important for its own sake.
When it comes to things like hormone therapy and sex reassignment surgery, this is like a last resort after going through so many different types of therapy and other interventions. It's not like people are just I mean, there's medical
We have
guidelines.
whistleblowers. We have whistleblowers that have spoke up that said
Sure,
that
if
hormone
someone's
blockers were
violating
given-
medical guidelines, then obviously like prosecute them for that, and you should be
And I
exercising.
just want to clear out, like, we're now seeing a story from the New York Times just this week that's basically saying, hey, guess what? That prescribing Ritalin and Adderall to all these children, yeah, sorry, that was just a big scam to make pharmaceutical companies
Hold on.
money.
This is now a
trans
totally
issue is
different
but the
topic
point,
than
the
sex
tangential,
reassignment surgery.
but the reason I'm saying this is because it's huge business, the sex reassignment surgery, and saying like, well, there are laws and you have to go through certain procedures. There are loopholes to get around that, and whistleblowers have talked quite frequently, including
Sure,
people that have
I'm all in favor of
detransitioned about how
having
terrible
medical
it is.
ethics and medical guidelines. I have a friend in medical school, and I can tell you one of the reasons I don't like talking about this is because people like to pretend like this is all very black and white and clear cut. My gut feeling on this is that I'm probably against these types of procedures for minors. But again, like when we talk about these procedures, they are so insanely rare and there's so many hurdles you have to go through before you get them that I'm imagining like in the cases where someone is getting these procedures, it's a last resort after years of therapy and trying everything else. If people are rushing to this, obviously I have an issue with that because it's like irreversible.
But the rare thing's an interesting argument because we're told as a society we have to bend over backwards for a very rare condition, which is trans.
What do you mean by bend over backwards?
Like every space that we have has to be infiltrated now by people that are pretending, and we have to accept their
Maybe if you're
bullshit.
in
Let me give you an example.
Like
for example, I've been
banned
banned on Twitch for misgendering someone. I have to accept on one of the biggest live streaming social media platforms that I have to pretend that a trans person who's a biological male is a biological female. I have to do that at work. Almost every place of employment in this country. We have DEI hires, which is a thing that's tangential to this, that we've prioritized hiring people. We've created victimhood as one of the biggest social currencies and one of the best ways to be a victimhood, particularly if you're white and a male and you can't get into that victimhood classification.
What is the big issue with like if someone looks entirely like a woman, just calling them her? Like I'm trying to understand, like just on like an interpersonal level, like what's the issue?
Previously, if they asked me, I would happily do that. If they demanded that I do, if they demanded I do, that'd be different. The problem is it didn't just stop at the level of, hey, I'm asking you nicely to do this. It was a constant infiltration of spaces over and over again.
Sure.
And it's occurring simultaneously at the time where it's occurring. This sort of cultural Marxist bullshit is occurring against white people, is occurring against Christians, is occurring. And like, for example, while this is going, we're also being told, well, we have to have drag queens in children's spaces, and we have to have critical race theory being taught to children in school, and we have to teach children that actually you're not born a male or a female, like, and we have to take off birth certificates like mother and father. All of this stuff is a concerted effort.
The issue that I have with
the
way that you're framing this conversation is we always focus so much on the fringes to talk about the broader group of transgender people, and like most transgender people are probably just like dressing differently and they want to be called by a different name and pronoun. That is the vast majority. And I always question the motives of like, why are we focusing so much time and energy? I'm fine to have the conversation as I've been having, but why are we focusing so much time and energy on the fringes of a group that by and large is like just trying to like live their life and not face discrimination?
Because they are at the forefront of sort of victimhood culture and DEI has shoehorned itself into every institution in this country.
Well, DEI, again, there's a lot of people that define it incorrectly. DEI typically just expands applicant pools without lowering standards. Like when Trump talked about the FAA having DEI, they just increased their applicant pools to people that did not have access to extracurriculars in school and who didn't have a long work history. DEI, in many cases, does not actually mean you're lowering standards. It just means you're broadening application pools. And that's sort of like
not DEI. The equity. What does equity mean?
Depends on who you ask.
Okay, well, traditionally, what it ends up meaning in practice is equal outcome. And this is another thing that happens over and over. What happens is we're told, no, this isn't happening, like the border. And then when we find out it is happening, they're like, yeah, it happened, but it was a good thing. So I could tell you, we can go through the list. We can go through the list.
Hired on lower standards, I oppose that.
Right. So we could go through a list of someone like Christopher Rufo has put together that shows at universities, that shows that many major corporations, their DEI has resulted in hiring people not based on merit, but based on these categories. But anecdotally, I can tell you, and I'm sure that almost everyone in this chat could back this up if you don't want to look at studies. You personally know companies, maybe I'm working for one right now, that has quotas, that says that we need certain people. I have a friend that works for a government defense contractor that's telling me that it's fucking laughable that they're basically being said that everyone in a supervisory position or higher by 2030 has to be someone from a minority class.
Race-based hiring quotas literally unconstitutional?
No, well, I think that they should be, but I think that they're applied in many ways.
Affirmative action was struck down by the courts, and I see a big conflation between DEI and affirmative action in many cases. And again, when I bring up them not lowering standards, I'm quoting from the FAA website, which is sort of the zeitgeist that brought this into the public conversation, is Trump saying these crashes are happening because of FAA DEI. When you actually read the DEI guidelines, they just expanded the applicant pool. They did not lower standards.
I don't believe that they're being accurate in most of the institutions like this. And I personally know, and there's stories that have been reported that we could see actual proof of it, of DEI prioritizing hiring people based on race, based on other minority
I oppose
status.
that. If you can find me specific cases, I will stand with you in opposing that. I just don't think that that's the norm.
Well, you mentioned Harvard. Will you admit that Harvard's application processes should have been unconstitutional based on the fact they were prioritizing people of color?
Yeah, I oppose affirmative action.
Okay, so the fact that occurred,
it's now unconstitutional.
What's that?
It's now unconstitutional.
Okay.
It has been for a while. So I just like, if it's happening, then sure. Like if there's,
do you think it ceased to happen now?
In large part, probably, yeah.
I think that you're full of it. I think that it just ignores the reality. I think that if you're a large
Harvard
company,
thing,
you might not put down like, oh yeah, we're only hiring a black person. But when that black person comes in, or when that trans person comes in, or when that woman comes in, or when that Muslim comes in, you're like, this will look really good if we could tout 30% of our supervisory forces people that are minorities.
do you think that they are then assuming that I'm taking this for granted, your premise, that they're then saying, okay, this guy has a lower SAT score, we're still going to take him?
In Harvard?
Just in general,
Or in universities? I think that probably occurs.
Still?
Yes. Now,
Okay,
I haven't seen the data, but the
data or court cases on that. If it does occur, I will agree that I think that's bad. I don't think it should play a role.
Most recent data that I've seen, I think, was circa 2023. I could be wrong. I'd have to pull up the study, by the way, I appreciate this debate. I'm having a lot of fun. Neither of us have been pulling up big studies. And I think not just you shouldn't trust me and I shouldn't trust you, but the audience should try to do their own research as well, because sometimes we're citing things, right? But we're given sort of the benefit of the doubt. I believe it was 2023 is the most recent data I saw on that.
Yeah.
That was actually, it's Asian Americans. It's like that their SAT score has to be so many points higher on average to get into the institution. And then when you filter down, you get to whites, then you get to Hispanics, and then you get to blacks. It's like the average applicant for a university like Harvard that's black is like a 1380 SAT
The question
score.
there, though, is like, are they indexing based on race, or does that just happen to be the distribution because they're indexing based on like socioeconomic background, which you'd agree that's fair to take into account, right?
I don't have a problem taking in socioeconomic background, but I think that it's clear. I think that it's clear.
Well, what about if someone's a foreign
race.
exchange student? They maybe bring like a different cultural attitude from a different country.
I don't understand the question. What
Like,
about
could that be sort of like a one-up on someone's application that they come from somewhere that's like foreign and maybe they bring like a different cultural perspective with that as well?
I don't think we should prioritize things like that. No. I think
Okay,
socioeconomics a little different. And I think even in there that it should be very tight, that it's still put through a merit system that they have. Like, it's like anything, like let's take it out into like a firefighter because it's easier for people to understand. There should be a minimum standard for getting into being a firefighter. Is it okay if we say, well, if you meet that minimum standard and this guy met that minimum standard, but you're from a poorer neighborhood, that will hire you? It's debatable. I would say most of the time, no. But at university, it makes more sense why you'd want to try to prioritize people. But you still have to meet that minimum standard.
As someone who applied for undergrad in 2019, which I believe might have actually been before affirmative action was struck down by the courts, I can promise you need really good stats to get into a lot of these schools. Like I went to University of Michigan, and like if you're applying with like a 1200 SAT, it doesn't matter what skin color you are, you're not getting in.
So
that's more anecdotal, I'll admit, but that's being involved in the process.